There are times in life when the light of truth seems dim, when the road ahead feels uneven, and the whispers of temptation seem louder than the voice of reason. In such moments, the heart wavers, the mind questions, and faith is tested in its purest form. Yet it is precisely then, when everything in us wants to take a shortcut through the crooked path, that we are called to trust more deeply in our God. To walk uprightly is not merely to follow a set of rules, it is to keep one's soul aligned with the eternal rhythm of divine truth. The crooked path may appear smooth for a while, but it is paved with compromises, self-deception, and the slow corrosion of peace. The straight path, though steep and narrow, is where the hand of God steadies every step and strengthens every faltering spirit. Human beings are restless creatures, easily swayed by the appearance of ease. We are drawn to the glitter of quick answers, the promise of comfort without conviction, and the illusion that we can shape destiny without surrendering to its maker. But faith demands the opposite. It calls for trust without evidence, obedience without applause, and courage without assurance. To trust in God is not to understand every twist in the journey, but to believe that every turn, however uncertain, serves a divine purpose. When the crooked path beckons with its charm, it is not the voice of wisdom but of fear. The fear that perhaps God has forgotten us, that perhaps we must take matters into our own hands. Yet to yield to that fear is to lose sight of the one who governs all things with perfect timing. The soul's greatest temptation is self-reliance without reverence. It is easy to pray when life is smooth, but true trust is revealed in silence, in waiting, in those hours when the heavens seem closed and our prayers echo back unanswered. The faithful heart does not demand explanations. It rests in the assurance that God's silence is not absence, but preparation. The crooked path, on the other hand, tempts us with immediacy. It tells us that what we desire can be seized if we only bend the truth a little, if we only step aside from the moral road just once. Yet every time we take such a step, something inside us bends as well. The conscience loses its clarity, the spirit its peace, and the heart its innocence. God does not ask for perfection of knowledge, He asks for the perfection of trust. He does not demand that we never stumble, but that we never abandon the path altogether. For trust is not a feeling. It is an act of will. It is to say, even through trembling lips, I will believe that your way is right, even when it feels wrong to me. The crooked road offers quick satisfaction, but the straight road builds eternal strength. The world will mock such faith, calling it blind, outdated, or naive, but blindness to worldly wisdom is often the first step toward divine sight. There is a peculiar beauty in walking the straight path amid a crooked generation. It is the beauty of quiet endurance, of invisible victories that no one else sees. Each step forward becomes an act of rebellion against the cynicism that says faith is foolish, and each act of obedience becomes a statement that trust in God is still possible in a world that worships doubt. To walk uprightly is to defy despair, to look beyond what is seen and anchor one's hope in what is eternal. It is not that the crooked path has no allure. Rather, the faithful heart has learned that its sweetness turns to bitterness, while the path of righteousness, though hard at first, grows sweeter with every step. In moments when fear whispers, "You must act now," faith responds, "I will wait on God." In moments when the crooked road looks bright and promising, the heart that trusts says, "I would rather walk in darkness with God than in light without Him." Such trust transforms the journey. It makes every hardship a lesson and every delay a sign of divine mercy. The one who trusts does not measure God's goodness, by the ease of life, but by the constancy of his presence. To trust in God and not go on a crooked path is, in the end, to live with integrity before the unseen. It is to say that the compass of our soul points not toward comfort, but toward truth, not toward success, but toward surrender. It is to believe that every straight path, however narrow, leads home. Trust in God is proven most when the path is uncertain and silent, in the quiet moments of confusion, when the world seems distant and our prayers return to us unanswered. Faith stands as the only bridge between despair and hope. It is easy to say we trust when everything is clear, when blessings flow like sunlight and life moves without resistance. But when the horizon darkens and we no longer see where the next step leads, that is when trust becomes real. Trust that costs nothing means little. It is in the struggle to believe amid uncertainty that the soul learns the true nature of dependence on God. When human logic fails, when the heart trembles at the edge of the unknown, faith steps forward, not with sight, but with surrender. God often allows silence to fall upon us, not as punishment, but as a refining fire. Silence tests the depth of belief. It strips away superficial devotion and reveals whether we love God for his gifts or for himself alone. In the absence of immediate answers, the heart begins to wrestle, seeking, questioning, and yearning for assurance. Yet in that very yearning lies the seed of spiritual maturity. For in the silence, God teaches us to listen with the soul rather than the ear. He trains us to recognize his presence not in noise or spectacle, but in the stillness where trust is born. Many turn away in such moments, mistaking silence for abandonment, but the wise remain, knowing that faith is not about feeling God's nearness, but choosing to believe in it despite the void. There is a sacred tension in the life of faith, a pull between what we see and what we hope for. The uncertain path magnifies that tension, and it is there that the heart learns patience. God's timing often seems delayed, but delay is not denial. The waiting season is where trust is stretched and strengthened, like a muscle torn and rebuilt through strain. Each unanswered prayer, each delayed promise, is not an oversight of heaven, but a deliberate act of love, meant to draw us deeper into dependence. Trusting in God during uncertainty means laying down the need to control outcomes, to predict, to manipulate. It is the quiet decision to rest, even when nothing outwardly changes, believing that the unseen hand of God is still guiding every detail. The silence of God can feel heavy, especially when we have done all we can and yet see no fruit. But faith does not thrive in abundance, it grows in famine. When everything around us fails to affirm our belief, the heart is forced to draw from a deeper source. That is the moment when trust ceases to be an emotion and becomes a conviction. It is no longer about feeling brave or peaceful. It is about deciding that God remains faithful, even if the evidence seems to say otherwise. This is where the believer stands alone against doubt, choosing to walk by faith and not by sight. It is in these unseen battles that the strongest foundations of trust are built, not through miracles, but through endurance. The uncertain path also exposes the fragility of human confidence. We come to realize that our wisdom, our strength, and even our best intentions are limited. Life's unpredictability reminds us that control is an illusion, and peace can only come from surrender. Trust, then, becomes an act of humility, a declaration that God's wisdom exceeds ours, that his purposes, though hidden, are never cruel. In uncertainty, we learn that faith is not about predicting the end, but walking faithfully through the middle. The path may twist and turn, and the silence may stretch longer than expected, yet in those unseen hours, the soul begins to hear whispers of divine assurance. soft reminders that God has never failed his promises. The greatest saints, the most steadfast believers, all walked through valleys where God seemed distant. They learned that the silence of heaven is often the classroom of faith. In the absence of answers, they discovered the presence of grace. Every unanswered question became an invitation to deeper intimacy with the Creator. Trust, in such times, transforms from a simple belief into a posture of worship. It says, "Even here, even now, I choose you." The path of uncertainty thus becomes holy ground, for it is where the human will bend to divine purpose. There is beauty in such trust, an unspoken strength that defies the logic of fear. When others panic, the trusting heart stands calm, not because it sees the future, but because it knows who holds it. In the stillness, faith takes root not in the comfort of certainty, but in the confidence of character. The uncertain path refines us. It burns away pride, impatience, and false security until only pure reliance remains. To trust God in silence is to believe that his heart is good, even when his hand is hidden. It is to walk through the unknown, not because the path is clear, but because his promise is sure. The crooked path offers ease, but it corrodes peace and integrity. It is often the smoother road, shining with the illusion of safety and success, promising quick results and painless progress. Yet beneath its surface lies decay, a quiet erosion of the soul that begins the moment one chooses convenience over conviction. The crooked path does not begin as a sudden rebellion against truth. It begins with small compromises, gentle justifications, and the subtle voice that says, "This one time will not matter." It lures the weary traveler who grows impatient waiting for God's timing, offering a way that seems right to human eyes, but leads only to inner emptiness. The crooked path disguises itself with charm. It offers what appears to be wisdom, flexibility, or practicality, convincing one that moral lines can be bent for good reasons. It often dresses itself in noble language, just being realistic, doing what must be done, protecting myself. But the spirit that walks this path soon learns that what begins as a harmless detour becomes a habit of the heart. Once peace is traded for comfort, the conscience loses its voice. Integrity, that quiet guardian of the soul, is dulled little by little until wrong begins to look reasonable and truth begins to feel inconvenient. The tragedy of the crooked path is not its sudden downfall, but its gradual corruption. It destroys the soul by making it forget that righteousness was ever worth the cost. The ease of the crooked way is its greatest deception. It removes the immediate pain of obedience, yet it multiplies the long agony of regret. The straight road, though harder, allows one to sleep with a clean heart, but the crooked road, though soft beneath the feet, weighs heavily on the mind. Every dishonest word, every hidden act, every compromise becomes a stone laid upon the spirit. There is no true rest for the one who walks it, only a parade of temporary victories, masking the slow collapse of inner peace. The smile remains, but the joy fades, success grows, but satisfaction shrinks. The soul begins to crave peace again, yet cannot find it, for peace cannot dwell where integrity has been exiled. In moments of weakness, the crooked path feels like relief. When the righteous way seems too long or too lonely, when faith demands endurance beyond what seems fair, temptation offers shortcuts. It whispers that God's way is too strict, too slow, too uncertain. And so, in fear or frustration, many turn aside, thinking they will return later, after things have settled. But every step on that path makes return more difficult. The longer one walks away from the truth, the more the eyes adjust to the darkness. It becomes comfortable. It becomes normal. That is the quiet danger. not destruction in one moment, but slow distance from God until the soul no longer notices his absence. Integrity is not tested when life is simple. It is tested when compromise seems harmless. True strength lies not in great gestures of faith, but in the small, unseen choices where no applause follows. The man or woman who chooses truth when no one is watching builds a fortress around the soul that cannot be shaken. The crooked path removes that fortress brick by brick, replacing it with shadows. Every dishonest decision weakens the foundation of character, until even a gentle wind of temptation can bring it down. The loss is not only moral, but spiritual. Peace with oneself and peace with God are intertwined, and when one breaks, the other follows. The ease of the crooked path also blinds one to its cost. It promises quick satisfaction, but that satisfaction demands constant payment. Guilt, anxiety, fear of being exposed, and the endless need to justify one's choices. It creates a divided self, where outward appearances conflict with inward reality. The heart longs for rest, but cannot find it, because it lives in contradiction. The soul was not designed to thrive in duplicity. It was made for harmony between what is believed and what is lived. When that harmony breaks, even the smallest blessings lose their sweetness. Success achieved dishonestly becomes hollow. Relationships sustained by deceit lose depth. Life itself loses meaning, because peace, the rarest and purest gift, is gone. To walk the straight path requires courage, but it rewards with serenity. To walk the crooked path requires surrender, but it punishes with turmoil. God does not withhold blessings from those who stay true. He delays them to preserve what is sacred within them. The crooked road, though glittering with worldly promise, cannot satisfy the soul because it separates the traveler from the one who gives meaning to every step. The person who trusts in God's timing and refuses the detour, though weary and misunderstood, carries within them a treasure that cannot be stolen: peace of mind and integrity of spirit. These are the marks of a soul that refuses to bow to the ease of deceit, that chooses righteousness, not because it is simple, but because it is right. True faith is obedience without evidence and courage without assurance. It is not the comfort of knowing, but the resolve to trust when nothing makes sense. Faith does not begin when we see the outcome. It begins when we take the step, not knowing whether the ground beneath will hold. The heart that truly believes does not demand proof before it acts. It moves forward because of who God is, not because of what it can see. In a world that worships logic and demands constant validation, faith becomes a quiet rebellion. It refuses to depend on what is visible and instead clings to the unseen certainty of divine purpose. The strength of faith is not measured by clarity, but by perseverance through mystery. Obedience without evidence tests the depth of one's trust in the divine. It asks a soul to surrender control, to act according to truth, even when that truth yields no immediate reward. The faithful person obeys not because the path is guaranteed to lead to blessing, but because obedience itself is an act of love. God often calls his people to move before he reveals the reason, to walk while the path is still hidden, to trust his voice more than their vision. Such obedience can appear foolish to the world, yet it is the purest form of worship. When we obey without evidence, we declare that our loyalty lies not in outcomes, but in the one who commands. The essence of faith is not agreement but submission. To say, even though I do not understand, I will still follow. Courage without assurance is born in the same soil. It does not come from certainty of success, but from conviction of purpose. The courage that faith demands is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, steady, and often unseen. It is the courage to wait when impatience screams, to stand firm when fear whispers, and to move forward when logic advises retreat. Assurance is the language of the world. It demands guarantees before commitment. Faith, however, thrives in the language of trust, where obedience precedes understanding. To have courage without assurance is to live by conviction rather than convenience, to hold to truth even when no one else believes it will prevail. Every believer faces moments where evidence fades and promises seem distant. In such seasons, the natural instinct is to doubt, to demand signs, to question motives, to hesitate. Yet God's silence in those moments is not rejection, but refinement. He strips away false securities so that our faith might rest not on visible blessings, but on invisible strength. When evidence is removed, trust becomes pure. When assurance is gone, courage becomes holy. This is the furnace of faith, where the heart learns that divine reliability is not dependent on human clarity. God does not owe explanations. He offers presence, and in that presence, even the darkest uncertainty becomes sacred ground. True faith requires a soul to face fear without fleeing. It is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to be ruled by it. Courage without assurance means continuing to act rightly, even when the outcome may bring loss or pain. It is standing by truth when compromise would be easier, speaking light when silence would be safer, holding integrity when deceit would seem wiser. Faith does not guarantee safety, it guarantees meaning. It gives purpose to suffering and turns obedience into victory, even when the world calls it defeat. Those who walk by faith are not promised smooth roads, but they are promised that every rough path leads closer to the heart of God. There is a deep beauty in faith that chooses obedience before understanding. It transforms the soul from a seeker of control into a vessel of trust. Each act of obedience without evidence strengthens the spirit's ability to endure. Each moment of courage without assurance purifies the heart from dependence on worldly success. The faithful person becomes steady, unmoved by shifting circumstances, because their foundation is built on the unchanging character of God. They no longer need proof to believe, nor reward to obey, because they have tasted the peace that comes from surrender. Faith of this kind is rare, for it demands everything. It asks for the death of pride, the release of fear, and the surrender of certainty. It invites the believer into a life where trust is deeper than reason, and obedience is more powerful than understanding. To walk by faith is to see through the eyes of eternity, to recognize that what seems uncertain now is part of a greater story that only God can complete. The one who learns this kind of trust walks freely, for they are no longer driven by results, but guided by conviction. True faith, in its purest form, is not about knowing what lies ahead, but about knowing who leads the way. God's silence is not absence, but preparation for greater purpose. When heaven grows quiet and prayers seem unanswered, the human heart begins to wrestle with doubt, thinking that perhaps it has been forgotten. Yet in those stretches of divine stillness, something profound is taking place within the soul. Silence is the language of transformation, the unseen workshop where faith is refined and trust is deepened. God often withdraws the sense of his nearness not to punish, but to mature the believer. The silence is not the void of his presence, it is the shadow of his work. When we cannot hear him, he is often speaking to the depths of us that words cannot reach. In moments of divine silence, impatience becomes the great enemy. We live in a world that measures faith by results, that equates answers with love and delay with rejection. But the truth is far deeper. God's silence often precedes his greatest revelations. The waiting is never empty, It is filled with invisible design. When the soul is forced to live without immediate guidance, it learns to cling not to signs, but to character. Faith grows best in the soil of uncertainty, for it is there that the heart learns to believe without seeing, to trust without feeling, and to obey without understanding. The silence of God teaches the believer that relationship with Him is not built on constant reassurance but on unwavering confidence in His nature. When God is silent, He is not ignoring the cry of the heart, He is shaping it. Silence presses the soul into self-examination, exposing motives and deep desires. It reveals whether one seeks God for His blessings or for himself. Many pray for deliverance, but not transformation. They want the situation to change, but not the heart. God's silence corrects this imbalance. It forces the soul to look inward and upward at once, to ask, do I love Him for what He gives, or for who He is? In that confrontation, faith is purified. The silence burns away the noise of selfishness and pride, leaving behind a quiet dependence that is no longer conditional. There is also wisdom in God's delay. What seems like withholding is often protection. What feels like distance is often preparation. God's timing does not operate by human impatience, for He sees what we cannot. The blessing that comes too soon can destroy. The opportunity taken too early can collapse under its own weight. So He waits. He hides His hand until the heart is ready to hold what it has asked for. In the waiting, character is forged, endurance is tested, humility is strengthened. Silence becomes a sacred teacher, showing us that faith is not proven by receiving, but by remaining. The soul that endures divine silence emerges different. It learns to walk by conviction, not by confirmation. It finds strength in stillness and meaning in mystery. When the voice of God finally breaks the silence, it does not come to a shallow heart, but to one softened by waiting. The very stillness that once felt unbearable becomes the foundation upon which true intimacy with God is built. For when one has learned to trust in silence, no noise of the world can shake that trust. The believer who survives the quiet learns a secret. God was never gone. He was closer than breath, working behind the curtain of time. The stories of faith throughout history echo the same truth. Abraham waited in silence for the promise of a son. Joseph sat in prison while God seemed absent, only to be raised in due time. David cried out from caves and deserts, yet his greatest psalms were born in the spaces where heaven gave no reply. Even Christ, on the cross, cried out into the silence, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" And yet, through that silence, redemption was accomplished. The divine pattern repeats: silence before revelation, waiting before fulfillment, darkness before dawn. God uses quiet to shape those He loves most deeply. To mistake God's silence for absence is to misread the language of heaven. He speaks in whispers to those who listen, but He also speaks in pauses to those who will wait. The silence is not the end of communication. It is another form of it. It teaches trust in what cannot be felt, faith in what cannot be seen. It strips away the reliance on emotion and replaces it with steadfast conviction. The believer learns that peace does not depend on hearing God's voice, but on knowing His heart. Every silence carries within it a promise. The longer the wait, the greater the purpose being prepared. God is never still without reason. What appears as delay is often alignment. Aligning people, timing, and circumstances to create the perfect moment of fulfillment. The faithful soul, though wary, learns to rest in that unseen orchestration. The silence that once seemed unbearable becomes a song of trust, because it reveals that God's presence is not measured by sound or sight, but by the quiet certainty that He is working even when all else seems still. The straight path may be narrow, but it leads to eternal strength and truth. It is the road of discipline, patience, and quiet perseverance, a path not chosen by many because it demands surrender rather than comfort. The narrow way often appears less appealing, for it does not shine with the glitter of instant success or easy pleasures. It is marked by sacrifice, loneliness, and moments of trial. Yet every step upon it builds something within the soul that cannot be shaken. The strength it produces is not of the body, but of the spirit, and the truth it reveals is not of circumstance, but of eternity. The one who chooses this path learns that holiness is not in the absence of hardship, but in faithfulness through it. The straight path requires focus in a world filled with distractions. It demands that the traveler keeps his eyes on what is eternal, while the world shouts the praises of what is temporary. It is easy to be tempted by shortcuts, to think that a little compromise or a little bending of truth will make the journey easier, but every step away from righteousness leads further from peace. The narrow road may be steep, yet it is clear, and though it may wound the feet, it strengthens the heart. The crooked road, in contrast, seems wide and welcoming, yet it drains the soul of purpose. The straight path disciplines desire, teaching the heart to hunger for what truly satisfies, instead of what merely delights for a moment. Walking the straight path is not about perfection, but direction. It means setting one's will toward God, even when emotions resist and circumstances discourage. There are days when obedience feels heavy, when faith seems like walking uphill against the wind. Yet it is in these very moments that strength is forged. Every trial on the narrow road becomes a lesson in endurance. Every sacrifice becomes an offering of trust. The world may mock such persistence, calling it blind devotion, but those who stay the course find a joy that cannot be imitated by fleeting pleasures. For true joy is not found in escaping difficulty, but in walking faithfully through it. The narrow road also purifies intention. It does not allow hypocrisy to thrive or half-hearted devotion to endure. It separates the sincere from the superficial, for only the humble heart can continue when the way is hard. God uses the challenges of the straight path to refine the soul, removing pride, greed, and the desire for recognition. The journey itself becomes a form of prayer, every struggle an act of worship, every obstacle a chance to prove love through endurance. Those who walk this path learn that truth is not merely something believed, but something believed, tested, and proven through perseverance. Strength born from the straight path is quiet, but unbreakable. It is the strength of a heart that has learned to trust even when weary, to stand even when wounded. It is not the prideful strength of independence, but the steadfast strength of dependence upon God. The world measures power by control, but the straight path teaches that true power lies in surrender. The one who yields to God's will becomes unshakable, not because life grows easier, but because their roots sink deep into the soil of truth. When storms come, such a soul does not fall, for it has been anchored by obedience. The narrow way may not promise comfort, but it offers unyielding peace, the kind that does not vanish when everything else collapses. Truth, too, reveals itself most clearly along the straight path. It cannot be found in a life of compromise, for truth demands alignment with God's will, even when that alignment costs something dear. Those who walk uprightly discover that truth is not an idea but a person, unchanging, eternal, and faithful. The narrow road draws the traveler nearer to that truth until their very life becomes a reflection of it. Each act of integrity, each choice to remain faithful when it would be easier to bend, becomes a testimony to the reality of divine truth in a world drowning in deception. To walk the straight path is to live in quiet contrast to the world's noise. It is to choose discipline over indulgence, faith over sight, and righteousness over recognition. It may seem lonely at times, for few walk it willingly, yet the presence of God fills that solitude with companionship. The narrow road is lined not with comfort, but with purpose, and purpose sustains the soul far longer than pleasure ever could. Each trial faced with patience, each temptation resisted with strength, builds eternal character. The kind of character that endures beyond this life. The straight path may not be wide enough for all our desires, but it is wide enough for God's grace. It strips away what is unnecessary and leaves only what is eternal. Those who walk it discover that every hardship, every delay, every tear has meaning, for it is shaping them for a destination beyond time. The road may be narrow, but it is the only one that leads home. And on it, the traveler finds the strength to endure, the truth to guide, and the peace that surpasses all understanding. When faith is tested, it is not God seeking to break us, but to reveal what we truly believe. The heart that claims trust must eventually be proven, for untested faith remains theory, not truth. Trials are not signs of divine anger. They are invitations to deepen our reliance on the one who sustains all things. When storms rise and prayers seem unanswered, that is when faith shows its true strength. It is not in comfort that trust grows, but in conflict. The furnace of hardship exposes what words cannot. Whether our confidence rests in God's character or in our circumstances, testing strips away illusion and forces the soul to decide whether it believes in God for His gifts or for His goodness. Faith, when tested, reveals its foundation. Many believe easily when blessings flow, when the path is smooth and life unfolds according to desire. But the faith that holds in darkness is the faith that heaven values, when all visible signs of God's favor fade, and yet the heart whispers, "I still trust you." That is worship in its purest form. It is in such moments that faith transitions from emotion to conviction, from convenience to commitment. The testing of faith is therefore not cruelty, but craftsmanship. It shapes us into vessels fit for endurance, capable of standing firm when the world trembles. God does not test to discover our limits. He already knows them. He tests to expand them, to show us that His strength can sustain us beyond what we imagined possible. In the silence of testing, many grow weary, mistaking delay for denial. Yet every period of waiting is sacred preparation. The seed must spend time buried before it breaks into life. Likewise, the believer must endure seasons where nothing seems to change, where heaven is quiet and effort feels wasted. But what is unseen is never inactive. God works most deeply when He works invisibly. While we long for instant deliverance, He is crafting deeper dependence. The faith that endures waiting is the faith that cannot be shaken later. Waiting, though painful, is the divine classroom where trust learns patience and patience matures into peace. Testing also purifies motive. It reveals whether faith is rooted in personal comfort or divine conviction. When blessings are stripped away, what remains is the essence of belief. The one who trusts only when rewarded does not yet understand faith. The one who trusts even when broken has entered the mystery of grace. True faith does not bargain with God, it submits. It says, "Even if you do not deliver, still I will serve you." Such surrender is not weakness but victory. For in that moment, the believer stands free from fear, free from the need to control outcomes, and free from the illusion that life must unfold according to human design. The testing of faith also teaches humility. It reminds us that we are not in command of time, outcomes, or destiny. We may plant and water, but only God gives growth. Trials humble the proud heart that once relied on its own strength, forcing it to kneel and remember that everything we have is sustained by divine mercy. In humility, we rediscover what it means to depend completely, to pray, not as a formality, but as a necessity. Faith tested by hardship becomes genuine, because it no longer relies on feelings or fortune. It rests entirely on God's faithfulness. There is also a hidden tenderness in God's testing. Though it may feel harsh, it is the love of a father who refuses to let his children remain weak. Strength cannot be built in comfort. Courage cannot be formed without challenge. God allows storms not to drown us, but to teach us to walk on water. He removes earthly supports so that we might learn to lean wholly upon Him. Every tear shed in faith becomes a seed of strength. Every unanswered prayer becomes a silent lesson in endurance. Those who emerge from such trials carry a depth that comfort could never produce. A quiet, steady confidence that God is enough. Testing transforms faith from words into witness. It gives the believer authority to comfort others, to speak hope not from theory, but from experience. When someone who has walked through fire says, "God is faithful," those words carry power because they were born in pain. Faith that survives testing becomes light for others who walk through the same darkness. The one who has endured learns that suffering does not contradict God's goodness. It reveals it. For in the breaking, one discovers that divine love does not always prevent pain, but redeems it. To be tested in faith is to be invited into intimacy with God. The struggle drives us closer to His heart, where trust replaces fear and surrender replaces striving. The narrow places of life, where strength fails and confusion reigns, become holy ground where grace takes root. The believer learns that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to trust amid it. The test does not destroy, it purifies, and through that purification, the soul discovers that its anchor was never in circumstance, but in the unchanging nature of God Himself.